So today what we'll be doing is we're going to talk about how to get our code to write out the digits from 1 through 9 using a thing called methods. And this is what our final solution will look like on our digital display. The key is to make sure that we have these things called methods that will allow us to run each of the individual digits that we need to print out. Now, I've written this code already, right? And in order to get the original loop of code running, right, what we did was we wrote for 9. We wrote each individual segment, like segment A here, B, C, D, E, F, and G, wrote them high and then wrote them low and had them low for a certain amount of time and then continued, right? Now, we did this in our loop here, right? And our loop had a specific start and an end. It's very similar to our setup section, right? Now, each of these sections we call methods, right? And each of these methods helped us to organize our code so that it will run. So all the code that we did originally to get our simulation going, which lit up all of the different individual lights, I'm going to call that the test loop. Okay? Now, I'm going to call it a test loop. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move all this information that we have here to just after the end of our test loop. And you'll notice here is where our loop started. Our loop code, our method called loop, is defined as this: loop void loop bracket with an open squiggly, and then we have an end squiggly. So now if I wanted to make a method called test loop, I'd have to use void test. Let's call it test, and think of this as a section of code that we can run for our whole machine here. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to paste that information that we have for our light up, and all we're going to do is we're going to put it into our loop here. Okay, and by putting it into our loop, we end up with something that looks like this. So in our loop, if we go and write void loop, so if we have our loop section and we want to run the test for our code, we just have to run test. The code looks for this specific signature called test with 2 brackets, and then runs everything in there and then goes back to the beginning. So let's try that right now. If this works, all we should see is all of these numbers lit up. That's it. And it continues looping, just as we expected. Now, in order to print out each of the numbers, we have to know what each of the LEDs are, right? And we talked about that in class already. So you remember with the 7-segment display, A was this one, B was this one, C was this one, D was this one, E was this one, F. So in order to get, let's say we wanted to print out the number 1, what we would have to do is we'd have to light segment B and C in order for it to show. So now remember in our loop, what we had was we had our loop and test. And when we ran test, it ran everything between these two open squigglies, open squiggly, and end squiggly, right? So in order to write the 0 code or 1 code, let's do 1 first. Void 1. In order to run 1, what I got to do is I have to make a small method with an open squiggle and an end squiggle. And then what we're going to do is inside our open squiggle and end squiggle, all we're going to do is we're going to tell it what we want written as high and low. Now, remember down here, inside here, we had set up our digital write. We use the word digital write to basically turn on a light, okay? So we're going to turn on, so in this case, we're going to turn on light A, and not light A, we're going to type on, turn on light. We said we were going to turn on light B and C to get the number 1. So in order to do that, we're going to turn it on. So we're going to turn on B, right? And we're going to do a digital write. C high. And once we've written that, we have to delay this code. Delay this code for, say, either 900 or 950 milliseconds. And then once we've done that, what you want to do is you want to clear the lights by turning them off. In order to do that, what you're going to do is you're literally just going to do another digital write, B, low, digital write, C, low. And because this needs to be a total of 1 second, we have just crossed 950 milliseconds. To get the total 1 second, all we have to do is delay for another 50 milliseconds, and we're done. And that's it. And that's how you get the number 1 to be written to the screen. But right now, all we have done is we have just set up a method, a chapter in our code that can be run anytime we want it. So if we actually ran this right now, the only thing we would see is what was happening in the test method here. So all of this code that basically lit up all the individual lights would come on. So let's take a look at that one more time. So if I run the simulation and I hide the code, the only thing that we see is each of the individual lights running from the test method. Now, in order to get our code to run for the number 1 section that we have created, or method that we've created, we have to tell the loop that we want it to run the 1 section. So let's do that right now. So in our code, right now we have test running. And then once test is done, we're going to go up to our loop method, then we're going to find its block of code which we need to run, and we say, alright, let's add. Notice I click to the end of my line and then I hit enter to give myself some space. Now that will allow me to write a command to go to specific 1, to go to method 1. Now method 1 is spelled like that. So we go 1, and now in order to tell the computer that we have finished our command, we must put in a semicolon, and we're done. Now what would happen is it would run our test method, which would light up all our lights. Then it would jump to the number 1 and then write B and C as high, delay for 950, and then turn off all the lights and delay for 50. And that's it. So let's take a look at this. So now when we run our code, all 8 lights will light up, 7 lights will light up, but then the number 1 shows up. Let's do that again. So it lights up all of the individual lights and then goes back to lighting up the number 1. Now, I've just shown you how to do that. You can stop and look at the code again in this video at any time. But what I want you to do is I want you to make sure that you write up all of the numbers from 0 through 9 for this 7 segment display. That's all I want you to do, okay? Good luck, guys.